Homeless girl. Shares her last meal with a stranger, unaware he's a millionaire, and falls in love. What you're about to listen will shock you to your core. A story of kindness so pure, it changed two lives forever. If this touches your heart, please share where you're reading from in the comments. The rain fell in sheets across the city, turning the evening sky into a canvas of gray misery. Lena Whitmore pulled her thin jacket tighter around her slender frame, her fingers numb from the cold that had seeped into her bones hours ago. At 23, she had already known more suffering than most people experience in a lifetime. She huddled beneath the meager shelter of a store awning, watching as people rushed by with umbrellas and raincoats, heading home to warmth and comfort. For Lena, home was wherever she could find a dry spot for the night. Tonight, that would be challenging. Her stomach growled painfully, a harsh reminder that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Digging into her pocket, she counted the coins she had collected from the sidewalk and the single-dollar bill a kind stranger had given her earlier. $4.37. Not much, but enough for a small meal. Lena's eyes fell on a small food cart at the corner, still open despite the downpour. The old man running it looked miserable, but he stayed, probably as desperate for money as she was. With shaky legs, she made her way toward it, already tasting the hot noodles that would soon warm her empty stomach. "What can I get you, miss?" the vendor asked, his eyes kind despite his clear eagerness to close up and escape the weather. "The small noodle cup, please," Lena said, her voice barely audible above the rain drumming on the metal awning above. As the vendor prepared her food, Lena's attention drifted to the alley beside the cart. There, huddled against a dumpster, sat a man who appeared to be in his 50s. His beard was long and unkempt, his clothes ragged and soaked through. He stared at the food cart with such intense longing that Lena felt her heart twist. The vendor handed Lena her steaming cup of noodles, and she breathed in the savory aroma, her mouth watering, but her eyes kept returning to the man in the alley. Before she fully realized what she was doing, Lena walked over to him. His eyes, startlingly blue amid the grime on his face, met hers with a mixture of wariness and dignity. "Would you like to share?" she asked, holding out the cup. The man hesitated. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Lena replied with a small smile, "but I'd like to." She sat down next to him, ignoring the wet concrete that immediately soaked through her jeans. Breaking the plastic fork in half, she handed him the larger portion and kept the smaller one for herself. "I'm Lena," she said. "Leo," he replied after a moment's hesitation. "Thank you for this." They ate in silence for a while, the hot food bringing color back to their cheeks. Lena gave Leo the majority of the noodles, claiming she wasn't very hungry, though the persistent gnawing in her stomach told a different story. "Why would you share your food with a stranger?" Leo asked suddenly, his voice unexpectedly cultured for someone in his condition. Lena shrugged. "I know what it's like to be starving. Kindness is all I have left to give." Leo studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. There was something about his gaze that seemed to see right through her, as if he could read the story of her life written on her soul. "And how did someone like you end up out here?" he asked. The question was direct, but not unkind. Lena looked down at the nearly empty cup of noodles. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," she said softly. "I was raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a car crash when I was 8. She owned a small bookstore, and it was my whole world. Books were my escape, my education, my friends. When she passed away last year, I thought I'd inherit the store, but her will was contested by a distant cousin who claimed everything. Turned out the lawyer was in on it too." She gave a bitter laugh. "By the time I realized what was happening, I'd been evicted from the apartment above the store. I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight back." Leo's expression changed subtly, a flash of anger crossing his features before he masked it. "The legal system often fails those who need it most." "It's just how things are," Lena said with a resignation that spoke of too many disappointments. "What about you? How did you end up here?" Leo seemed startled by the question, as if he wasn't used to being asked about himself. "I lost my way," he finally said. "Forgot what matters." They talked as the rain gradually eased, sharing the kind of conversation that sometimes only happens between strangers who expect never to meet again. Lena told Leo about her dreams of someday opening another bookstore, one where people could not only buy books but also find community, a place where no one would feel alone. That's a beautiful dream, Leo said. I hope you achieve it someday. It's just a dream, Lena replied with a sad smile. But dreams are free, right? When the noodles were gone and the rain had reduced to a drizzle, Lena stood up. I should try to find somewhere dry for the night. The shelter on Ninth is probably full by now, but I might try the church on Maple. I know a place, Leo offered hesitantly. Under the bridge by the river. It's relatively dry, and the police don't bother us there. Lena nodded. Thanks for the tip. Maybe I'll see you around, Leo. Perhaps, he replied, his expression unreadable. As Lena walked away, she didn't notice Leo watching her, nor did she see him pull out a small, expensive-looking phone from a hidden pocket in his tattered coat. What Lena couldn't have known was that the shabby clothes and unkempt beard were a carefully crafted disguise. Leo Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Technologies and worth over $2.3 billion, had been playing this role for weeks now, escaping the suffocating pressure of his corporate empire to understand what had gone wrong in his life. Leo had everything money could buy, yet felt hollow inside. His board of directors pushed for more profit at any cost. His so-called friends only appeared when they needed something. His last 3 relationships had ended when he discovered his partners were more interested in his wealth than in him. 2 months ago, after signing a deal that would make his company millions but put hundreds of people out of work, Leo had looked at himself in his office bathroom mirror and hadn't recognized the man staring back at him. That night, he had walked out of his penthouse with only a backpack containing some cash, a burner phone, and clothes from a secondhand store. His original plan had been to spend a week living rough, to remember what real problems looked like. But 1 week had turned into 2, then a month. He had discovered a strange peace in anonymity, in being judged only by his actions rather than his bank account. And then, tonight, a girl with nothing had shared her last meal with him. Leo stared at his phone, his thumb hovering over his assistant's number. 1 call, and he could be back in his penthouse with its heated floors and panoramic views, sipping 30-year-old scotch while his chef prepared whatever meal he desired. Instead, he put the phone away and headed toward the riverbank, following Lena at a distance to ensure she found the spot safely. He told himself it was just concern for a fellow human being in a vulnerable situation. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Her selflessness had awakened something in him that he thought had died years ago, curiosity about another person, untainted by what they could do for him. The bridge loomed ahead, a concrete monster spanning the river. Leo watched as Lena carefully made her way down the muddy embankment to the sheltered area underneath. A small community of homeless people had already settled there for the night, their meager possessions arranged around them. From his vantage point, Leo could see Lena approach the group. There was a moment of tension before an older woman nodded and indicated a spot where Lena could set up her makeshift bed, a flattened cardboard box and a thin blanket she pulled from her backpack. The simple courtesy between people who had nothing struck Leo with unexpected force. Back in his corporate world, he had encountered enough greed and selfishness to last a lifetime. People with millions fought viciously for thousands more, stepping over anyone in their way. Yet here, among those who possessed almost nothing, there was a sharing of space, of safety, of humanity. Leo retreated to the shadows, finding his own spot farther along the riverbank. He pulled out a waterproof sleeping bag, his one concession to comfort, and settled in for the night. But sleep eluded him as his mind kept returning to Lena's words. Kindness is all I have left to give. When was the last time he had given anything without calculating what he would receive in return? The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the previous day's gloom. Leo woke early, a habit from his business life that even weeks of homelessness hadn't broken. He packed his sleeping bag and walked to a public restroom in a nearby park to wash his face and rinse his mouth. As he emerged, he spotted Lena sitting on a bench, looking exhausted but determined. She had a small notebook open on her lap and was writing intently. Curious, Leo bought 2 coffees from a cart in the park and approached her. "Good morning," he said, offering her one of the cups. "I hope you don't mind. I saw you here and thought you might appreciate this." Lena looked up, surprised, then smiled in recognition. "Leo, right? Thank you." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "You didn't have to spend your money on me. You shared your food last night," Leo replied, sitting down beside her. "I'm just returning the favor." Lena nodded her thanks and took a sip of the coffee. This is good, real good. What are you writing? Leo asked, nodding toward her notebook. Lena hesitated before answering. Stories, mostly for children. When I was at the bookstore, I used to hold reading hours for the neighborhood kids. I'd make up stories for them sometimes, and they'd get so excited. A fond smile crossed her face at the memory. I write them down when I can, so I don't forget them. Paper and pens are cheaper than therapy. Leo felt a twist of admiration. Despite everything, she was still creating, still holding on to her passion. May I? He asked, gesturing to the notebook. After a moment's hesitation, Lena handed it to him. Leo read a few pages, genuinely impressed by the simple yet captivating tales. They were full of hope and courage, of small creatures overcoming big obstacles. Reading between the lines, he could see that many of the stories reflected Lena's own struggles. These are really good, he said, returning the notebook. You have a gift. Thanks, Lena replied, a hint of color in her cheeks. It's silly, I know. I should be focusing on more practical things, like finding a job. Not silly at all, Leo insisted. Dreams keep us going when nothing else will. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their coffee and watching as the park gradually filled with morning joggers and people walking their dogs to work. So, what's your plan for today? Leo asked eventually. There's a day labor place a few blocks from here. If I get there early enough, sometimes they pick me for cleaning jobs. If not, I'll check the community center for free lunch and maybe use their computers to look for more permanent work. The determination in her voice struck Leo. Here was someone fighting every day just to survive, yet she had shared what little she had with a stranger. The contrast with his own privileged existence was stark and uncomfortable. Mind if I join you? He asked impulsively. I could use the work too. Lena looked surprised, then shrugged. Sure, though I can't promise either of us will get picked. They tend to choose the stronger-looking guys first. They walked together to the day labor office, joining the already forming line of hopeful workers. Leo felt eyes on him as they waited and turned to see a man in a business suit staring at him from across the street. With a jolt, he recognized Daniel Porter, one of his company's vice presidents. Leo turned away quickly, hunching his shoulders and pulling his cap lower. The last thing he needed was to be recognized now. Thankfully, when he looked again, Porter had moved on, apparently not identifying his disguised boss. That had been close, too close. Leo suddenly realized the precariousness of his situation. What had started as a temporary escape was becoming complicated. He was being drawn into Lena's life, and for the first time in years, he found himself caring about someone else's struggles more than his own. As they waited in line, Leo studied Lena's profile. Despite the hardship evident in her too thin frame and the dark circles under her eyes, there was a quiet strength in the set of her jaw, a resilience in the way she held herself. She didn't complain, didn't wallow in self-pity. She simply kept moving forward. When was the last time he had faced a genuine challenge? Everything in his life had been smoothed by money, any obstacle removed with a wave of his platinum credit card or a call to the right person. He had forgotten what it meant to struggle, to fight, to overcome. The labor organizer began calling out names from his clipboard, selecting workers for the day's jobs. Lena's name wasn't called, neither was Leo's assumed name. Disappointment flashed briefly across Lena's face before she masked it with a resigned smile. There's always tomorrow, she said with forced cheerfulness. We should check the community center. The lunch there isn't bad, and sometimes they have job postings. As they walked, Leo felt a growing sense of purpose. He couldn't reveal his true identity, not yet, but perhaps there were other ways he could help. Not with charity, which he suspected Lena would reject, but by understanding what she truly needed to rebuild her life. What Leo didn't realize was how deeply this connection with Lena would challenge everything he thought he knew about wealth, happiness, and his own capacity for change. The deception that had begun as a simple escape was becoming something far more complex and potentially painful for them both. But in that moment, walking beside her through the morning sunshine, all he knew was that, for the first time in years, he felt something genuine stirring in his heart, something that all his billions had never been able to buy. The community center buzzed with quiet activity as Lena and Leo entered. The smell of vegetable soup and bread filled the air, making Lena's stomach growl despite her efforts to hide her hunger. They joined the line of people waiting for lunch. a mix of the homeless, the working poor, and those who had simply fallen on hard times. They usually have resources here too, Lena explained in a hushed voice. Job boards, counselors, sometimes even clothing donations. The computers are available for an hour at a time if you want to check emails or search for work. Leo nodded, taking in the well-organized space. He'd donated to places like this, of course, large tax-deductible checks written by his assistant and signed without much thought, but he'd never actually set foot in one, never seen the faces of people whose lives depended on these services. An older woman with kind eyes served them each a bowl of soup, a small sandwich, and an apple. Lena thanked her with genuine warmth, and Leo noticed the woman squeeze Lena's hand briefly. "Hang in there, dear," the woman said. "Something good is coming your way. I can feel it." Lena smiled, though Leo could see she didn't quite believe it. They found seats at a corner table, away from the main crowd. "You come here often?" Leo asked. "When I need to," Lena replied. "I try not to rely on it too much. There are people who need these services more than I do." Leo nearly laughed at the absurdity of her statement. Here she was, homeless and hungry, yet still thinking of others who might be worse off. It was so far removed from the cutthroat mentality of his corporate world that it almost seemed naive. But there was nothing naive about Lena, just a remarkable capacity for empathy that had somehow survived the harshness of her circumstances. After they finished eating, Lena showed Leo the job board. They scanned the sparse listings, mostly temporary positions, manual labor, or jobs requiring transportation they didn't have. "I'm going to check my emails," Lena said, moving toward the computer area. "I applied for a position at the library last week, not getting my hopes up, but you never know." Leo nodded and continued to study the board, his mind already spinning with thoughts of how he could anonymously help create better opportunities here. Perhaps a grant from his foundation, earmarked for job training programs, or he could have his HR department partner with the center to identify promising candidates. So many possibilities, now that he was seeing the need firsthand. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the man enter until he heard Lena's voice, suddenly sharp with tension. "I told you to leave me alone, Marcus." Leo turned to see Lena standing rigid by the computers, facing a well-dressed man in his 40s. His expensive watch and manicured nails marked him as someone who had never missed a meal in his life. "Come on, Lena, don't be like that," the man said, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of menace. "I'm just checking up on you, making sure you remember our arrangement." "There is no arrangement," Lena replied, her voice low but firm. "You stole everything from me. What more could you possibly want?" Leo moved closer, instinctively placing himself between Lena and this Marcus character. From the corner of his eye, he saw a staff member watching the interaction, clearly concerned but hesitant to intervene. "Who's this?" Marcus asked, looking Leo up and down with undisguised contempt. "Found yourself a boyfriend from the gutter?" Leo felt a surge of anger, not for the insult to himself, but for the way this man was treating Lena. "I suggest you walk away," he said quietly. Marcus laughed. "Or what? You'll attack me with your stench?" He turned back to Lena. "The offer still stands. All you have to do is sign over the rights to the remaining property, and I'll give you enough to get back on your feet. A win-win." "That property was my grandmother's. It's all I have left of her," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly. "And we both know it's worth 10 times what you're offering." "Worth nothing to you while you're sleeping under bridges," Marcus countered. "Be reasonable, Lena. You're not going to win this." Leo had heard enough. "The lady asked you to leave her alone," he said, his voice taking on the commanding tone he used in boardrooms. "I suggest you do so immediately." Something in Leo's demeanor must have given Marcus pause. He studied Leo more carefully, perhaps sensing that this homeless man wasn't quite what he seemed. "This doesn't concern you," Marcus said finally. "Lena and I have history." "History's done," Lena cut in. "Now get out of here before I ask them to call the police." Marcus smirked. "Sure, call them. I'm a respected businessman having a conversation with my deceased employee's granddaughter. You're a homeless woman causing a scene. Who do you think they'll side with?" Leo stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Marcus. "You'd be surprised how quickly fortunes can change. Walk away now, while you still can." Perhaps it was Leo's tone, or the cold certainty in his eyes, but Marcus took a step back. "This isn't over, Lena," he said. but the threat sounded hollow. With a final glare at them both, he turned and left. The moment the door closed behind him, Lena's shoulders slumped. Leo guided her to a nearby chair. "You okay?" he asked gently. Lena nodded, but her hands were shaking. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "Don't apologize. Who was that guy?" Lena sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Marcus Green. He worked with my grandmother for years, managed the bookstore finances. After she died, he produced documents showing she'd promised him partial ownership. It was all forged, but I couldn't prove it. He and his lawyer friend manipulated the will, claimed I was trying to defraud him. By the time I realized what was happening, they'd frozen all the accounts." "And the property he mentioned?" "A small cabin in the mountains. It was my grandparents' vacation home, barely more than a shed, really. It wasn't included in the business assets, so he couldn't touch it directly. But he's been after me to sign it over." She looked up at Leo with fierce determination. "It's all I have left. I'm not giving it up, even if I have to live on the streets forever." Leo felt a cold fury building inside him. He'd encountered countless Marcus Greens in his business career, ruthless opportunists who preyed on the vulnerable. Too often he'd looked the other way, telling himself it was just business. Now, seeing the direct impact of such predatory behavior, he felt ashamed of his past indifference. "You won't have to," he said. "Live on the streets forever, I mean." Lena gave him a sad smile. "It's sweet of you to say that. But the reality is, I'm running out of options. Jobs are scarce, especially for someone with no fixed address. And even if I find work, it'll take months to save enough for a security deposit on an apartment." Leo wanted desperately to tell her who he really was, to promise her that he could fix everything with a few phone calls. But he knew that would destroy the genuine connection they had formed. She would never look at him the same way again. "Let's get out of here," he suggested instead. "Get some air." They left the community center and walked aimlessly through the city streets. Leo let Lena lead, sensing she needed to move, to process the encounter with Marcus. Gradually, her steps slowed, and her breathing returned to normal. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for standing up for me back there. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Leo replied simply. They found themselves in a small park where they sat on a bench watching children play on a nearby playground. The normality of the scene, parents chatting while their kids climbed and swung, seemed to soothe Lena. "I used to dream about having kids someday," she said softly. "A little girl or boy who would grow up surrounded by books, just like I did." "You still can," Leo said. "This situation isn't permanent, Lena." She turned to look at him, really look at him, and for a terrifying moment, Leo feared she'd seen through his disguise. But her words surprised him. "You're different, you know that? Most people out here, they've given up, but not you. You still talk like someone who believes things can get better." Leo swallowed hard. "I've seen enough to know that circumstances can change in an instant, for better or worse." "What did you do before?" Lena asked. "Before you ended up here?" Leo had prepared for this question, but still hesitated. "I worked in technology, corporate world." "What happened?" "I lost my way," he said, echoing his words from the night before. "Started valuing the wrong things, made choices I'm not proud of." Lena nodded, not pressing for details. "We all have regrets. The trick is learning from them, I guess." As evening approached, they made their way back toward the bridge where Lena had spent the previous night. Leo found himself dreading the moment they would part ways, surprised by how quickly she had come to matter to him. "Will you be okay?" he asked as they neared the riverbank. "After what happened with Marcus today?" "I'll be fine," Lena assured him. "He's all talk, and I'm tougher than I look." Leo didn't doubt that, but still felt uneasy leaving her. "I could stay nearby," he offered, "just to keep watch." Lena's expression softened. "That's kind of you, but really, I'm okay. These people under the bridge, they look out for each other. For me." She hesitated, then added, "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Yes," Leo replied without hesitation. "I'll be around." After she disappeared under the bridge, Leo found a concealed spot where he could keep an eye on the area. He pulled out his burner phone, tempted once again to make the call that would return him to his real life. But the thought of walking away from Lena's struggles without helping felt impossible now. Instead, he called his most trusted security advisor, a former intelligence officer who handled the most discreet matters for Sinclair Technologies. Jenkins, the man answered on the first ring. It's me, Leo said quietly. I need information on someone. Marcus Green. Runs a bookstore in the downtown area, recently acquired it under questionable circumstances from the previous owner, Margaret Whitmore. Does this have anything to do with your current situation, sir? Yes, Leo admitted. And Jenkins? I need it handled with absolute discretion. No one at the company can know. Understood, sir. I'll have something for you by morning. Leo ended the call, feeling a mix of guilt and resolve. He was still deceiving Lena about his identity, but perhaps he could help her in ways that went beyond his wealth. If Marcus Green had indeed committed fraud, there would be evidence, and Leo had the resources to find it. The next few days fell into a pattern. Leo and Lena would meet in the morning, try their luck at the day labor office, and then spend the day together searching for work or simply talking. Leo learned more about Lena's life, how her grandmother had raised her with books and stories, instilling in her a love of literature that had survived even the harshest circumstances. In turn, he shared edited versions of his own experiences, careful to avoid details that might reveal his true identity, but honest about his disillusionment with the corporate world he claimed to have left behind. Each night, he made sure Lena was safely settled before finding his own spot to sleep, and each night he spoke with Jenkins, piecing together the evidence of Marcus Green's deception. On the fourth morning, Leo arrived at their meeting spot with a small paper bag containing muffins and coffee. Lena was already there, her face brighter than usual. I got a job, she announced as soon as she saw him. Just part-time shelving books at the library, but it's something, and they don't mind that I don't have a permanent address. That's fantastic, Leo said, genuinely happy for her. When do you start? Monday. It doesn't pay much, but it's a foot in the door, and I'll be surrounded by books again. Her smile was radiant, transforming her face in a way that made Leo's heart skip. They celebrated with the muffins and coffee, sitting on their usual bench in the park. Leo found himself watching Lena more than usual, noticing the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the small dimple that appeared when she smiled. Something was shifting between them, a comfortable familiarity giving way to feelings he wasn't prepared for. What about you? Lena asked suddenly. Any luck with jobs? Leo shook his head. Nothing yet, but I'm glad one of us is having some success. Lena reached out and squeezed his hand, her touch sending an unexpected jolt through him. Your turn will come, and hey, maybe the library will need more help soon. I could put in a good word. Leo smiled at the irony of Lena offering to help him find employment, if she knew who he really was. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She didn't know. And the longer he maintained the deception, the more painful the eventual truth would be. That night, Jenkins called with the final piece of information Leo needed. We've got him, sir, Jenkins said. Green falsified multiple documents and bribed the executor of the will. I've traced the money trail. Everything's documented. Good, Leo replied. Have the evidence package delivered to this address. He gave Jenkins the location of a coffee shop near the library where Lena would be working. And Jenkins, make sure it's addressed to Lena Whitmore, not to me. Sir, if I may, is this wise? Getting personally involved in someone else's legal troubles? Leo sighed. Probably not, but it's the right thing to do. After ending the call, Leo stared up at the stars visible between the city buildings. He was crossing a line, he knew, using his resources to help Lena while continuing to hide his true identity from her. It felt both right and wrong simultaneously. But seeing her face when she'd talked about the library job, the hope returning to her eyes, he couldn't walk away now. Somehow, in the span of just a few days, this remarkable woman had awakened something in him he'd thought was dead. Compassion, purpose, and something else, something that made his heart race when she smiled at him. He was falling for her, and that complicated everything. The following morning, they met for what Leo knew might be one of their last times together. Once Lena had the evidence against Marcus, things would move quickly. She would start rebuilding her life, and Leo would need to decide whether to reveal his true identity or simply disappear back into his own world. As they walked together along the riverfront, Lena suddenly took his hand. The gesture was so natural, so unforced, that Leo found himself holding his breath. I'm glad I met you, Leo, she said softly. I know it sounds strange, but these past few days, they've reminded me that there's still good in the world. I feel the same way, Leo replied, his voice rough with emotion. You've shown me what real courage looks like, Lena. What it means to keep going, keep hoping, even when everything's been taken from you. She stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes searching his. There's something about you. I can't quite figure it out, but I'm glad you're here. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Leo found himself leaning closer, drawn to her in a way he couldn't resist. Lena's eyes fluttered closed, and the world seemed to still around them. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, hesitant at first, then deepening with a surprising intensity. Leo's hand moved to cup her face, feeling the softness of her skin against his calloused palm. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. I didn't plan that, Lena whispered, a blush spreading across her cheeks. Neither did I, Leo admitted. And it was true. Nothing in his careful plans had included falling in love with Lena Whitmore. But as he looked into her eyes, seeing the mix of vulnerability and strength that had captivated him from the beginning, Leo knew he was in trouble, because the truth still stood between them, a wall he had built with his deception. And when it finally came down, as it inevitably would, he might lose her forever. For now, though, he pushed those thoughts aside, savoring this moment of connection. Whatever came next, this was real. Perhaps the most real thing he had experienced in years. The next morning, Leo waited nervously at the coffee shop near the library. Jenkins had confirmed the delivery was on schedule, an unmarked envelope containing all the evidence Lena would need to fight back against Marcus Green. Leo had arrived early, securing a table with a clear view of the door, his heart beating rapidly with each person who entered. When Lena finally appeared, her face lit up at the sight of him. She was wearing her cleanest clothes, hair pulled back neatly for her first day at the library. Despite the circumstances, she looked beautiful, her natural dignity shining through. You came to wish me luck, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. That's sweet. I never doubted you'd get a break eventually, Leo replied, pushing a cup of coffee toward her. You deserve this, Lena. She smiled, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. I'm nervous. It's silly, I know. It's just shelving books, but it's a step forward, Leo finished for her. Nothing silly about being nervous about that. They chatted for a few minutes about the job, Lena's excitement evident in her animated gestures and bright eyes. Leo found himself memorizing every detail of her face, unsure when or if he would see her again after today. The courier arrived right on time, asking for Lena Whitmore. Leo held his breath as she accepted the envelope with a puzzled expression. What's this? She asked, turning it over in her hands. Open it, Leo encouraged, his voice carefully neutral. Lena broke the seal and pulled out the contents, financial records, emails, notarized statements, all meticulously organized to tell the story of Marcus Green's fraud. Her eyes widened as she scanned the documents, her hands beginning to tremble. How did... She looked up at Leo, confusion and hope battling in her expression. Where did this come from? Leo had prepared for this question, but his answer still felt inadequate. Someone who wants to help you, someone who believes in justice. Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. And you just happen to know this would be delivered here? Today? A thread of suspicion had entered her voice, and Leo felt the first crack appear in his carefully constructed facade. Before he could respond, the coffee shop door opened, and a sharp voice cut through the morning chatter. Well, isn't this cozy? They both turned to see a woman in an impeccable business suit standing by their table, her expression a mixture of disbelief and triumph. Leo recognized her immediately, Vanessa Reed, his company's PR director. Of all the people to find him here. I thought Jenkins was joking, Vanessa continued, staring at Leo. But it's really you. My God, Leo, what are you doing? The board is in crisis, the Chen merger is falling apart, and you're playing homeless with... She glanced dismissively at Lena, the color drained from Lena's face as she looked between them. Leo, she whispered. Leo felt the moment slipping away from him, everything unraveling too quickly. Vanessa, this isn't the time or place. Not the time? Vanessa's laugh was harsh. It's been 6 weeks, Leo. 6 weeks while the company you built teeters on the edge. For what? Some kind of midlife crisis? Lena stood abruptly, the documents clutched tightly in her hand. Who are you? She asked Leo, her voice barely audible. Leo stood too, reaching for her, but she stepped back. Lena, please, let me explain. Explain what? Vanessa cut in. That he's Leo Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Technologies and worth over $2 billion. That this whole homeless act is just a bizarre vacation from reality. Each word hit Lena like a physical blow. Leo watched in agony as understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by hurt, then anger. Is that true? She asked him directly. Leo couldn't lie to her anymore. Yes, but Lena, it's not what you think. What I think. Her voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby tables. I think you let me tell you everything about my life, my struggles, while hiding who you really are. I think you watched me count pennies for food and never said a word. I wanted to tell you, Leo said desperately, but I was afraid you'd see me differently. Lena's laugh was bitter. Well, mission accomplished. I definitely see you differently now. She glanced down at the envelope in her hands. Did you do this? Get all this evidence against Marcus? Leo nodded reluctantly. I wanted to help you. Help me? The hurt in her eyes was unbearable. Was this just entertainment for you? Playing poor to see how we suffer? No, Lena, that's not. I shared my last meal with you, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I thought you were like me, that we understood each other. Leo wanted to tell her that they did understand each other, that the connection between them was real despite his deception, but the words wouldn't come. How could he make her see that these weeks living rough had changed him fundamentally? That meeting her had given him purpose again? I have to go, Lena said, backing away. I'm going to be late for my first day. Lena, please. But she was already heading for the door, the envelope still clutched in her hand. She paused at the threshold, turning back to look at him one last time. The pain in her eyes cut Leo to the core. Thank you for the evidence, she said quietly. I'm sure it wasn't hard for someone like you to get. Goodbye, Leo Sinclair. And then she was gone, the door swinging shut behind her. Leo stood frozen, the bustling coffee shop suddenly feeling hollow and meaningless. Well, that was dramatic, Vanessa commented, seemingly unmoved by the scene she had caused. Now, can we please get you back to the office? There's a car waiting outside. The board meeting is at noon. Leo turned to her, a cold fury replacing his shock. You had no right to interfere? Vanessa raised an eyebrow. No right? Leo, you disappeared without a word. The company is your responsibility. These little people and their problems, she gestured dismissively toward the door where Lena had exited. They're not your concern. In that moment, Leo saw his old life with perfect clarity. The endless meetings, the soulless deals, the relationships based on wealth and power rather than genuine connection. He had been sleepwalking through existence, surrounded by people like Vanessa who saw the world only in terms of profit and loss. You're wrong, he said quietly. They are my concern. She is my concern. Vanessa sighed dramatically. Fine. Help her if you must. Write a check, create a foundation, whatever makes you feel better about yourself. But do it as Leo Sinclair, billionaire CEO, not as some homeless vagabond in a social experiment gone too far. Her words struck uncomfortably close to how Leo had initially viewed his time on the streets. A temporary experiment. A way to remember what real problems looked like. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than that. He had become more than that. The car is waiting, Vanessa prompted when Leo remained silent. Leo glanced down at his ragged clothes, the costume that had become strangely comfortable over the past weeks. Then he looked toward the door through which Lena had disappeared. He knew what he had to do. Tell the board I'll be there, he said finally. But I have something to take care of first. Vanessa's relief was palpable. Thank God. I'll let them know you're coming in. And Leo, take a shower before you do. After she left, Leo stood alone in the coffee shop, torn between two worlds. The path back to his old life lay clear before him. Vanessa had mapped it out perfectly. Return to the company. Resume his position of power. Perhaps set up some charitable program to ease his conscience about Lena and others like her. But that path felt hollow now. Lena's words echoed in his mind. Was this just entertainment for you? The truth was, it had started that way. But somewhere between her sharing her meal with him and their kiss by the river, it had become devastatingly real. Leo knew he couldn't undo the hurt he'd caused her, but perhaps he could still help her rebuild her life, even if she never wanted to see him again. Over the next week, Leo threw himself back into his corporate role, surprising his boards with aggressive new directions for the company. He pushed through policies to increase wages for lower-level employees, established a foundation focused on affordable housing, and personally reviewed hiring practices to create opportunities for disadvantaged applicants. His executives were baffled by the changes, but Leo was unmoved by their concerns. When his CFO complained about the impact on the bottom line, Leo simply said, "There are more important things than profit margins." At night, alone in his penthouse apartment, he found himself missing the simplicity of his time on the streets, the genuine connections he had made, Lena's smile, the stars visible from beneath the bridge. He'd had Jenkins keep tabs on her, making sure she was safe. The reports were minimal, but reassuring. She'd kept the library job, was pursuing legal action against Marcus Green with the evidence Leo had provided, and had found temporary housing through a women's shelter. But Leo knew that wasn't enough. He needed to do more. Not as her savior, riding in on a white horse with his billions to rescue her. She deserved better than that. She deserved a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms, with dignity. The solution came to him during a board meeting as his executives droned on about quarterly projections. Leo interrupted the presentation, his mind suddenly clear. "I want to purchase a building," he announced, "in the downtown area, something that could be converted into mixed-use space, residential apartments above, commercial space below." The board members exchanged confused glances. "For the company?" someone asked. "No," Leo replied, "for a personal project." Within days, his real estate team had found a perfect property, a historic building with good bones but in need of renovation. Leo purchased it immediately, then set his plan in motion. First, he established a trust to manage the property, with strict guidelines about affordable rent for both the residential units and the commercial spaces. Then, he had a small studio apartment prepared in the building, furnished simply but comfortably. Finally, he arranged for the property manager to reach out to Lena with an offer, a job running a small bookstore in the building's main commercial space, with the apartment included as part of her compensation. The offer would come with no strings attached, no mention of Leo's involvement. The trust documents were structured to prevent Lena from discovering his connection to the property for at least 5 years, by which time he hoped the bookstore would be thriving under her management and she would be firmly back on her feet. It wasn't perfect. He was still deceiving her in a way. But this deception felt different. It was about giving her an opportunity, not taking something from her. And if she never knew it came from him, so be it. Her happiness and security were what mattered now. The property manager reported back that Lena had been skeptical at first, questioning why she would be chosen for such an opportunity. But when shown the building and told about the community focus of the project, something had sparked in her eyes. She had accepted the position, agreeing to move in the following week. Leo drove past the building the day Lena moved in, keeping a safe distance, just needing to see her one more time. The sight of her carrying a small box of belongings into the building, her face more relaxed than he'd seen it in their time together, brought both pain and satisfaction. She was going to be okay. That had to be enough. As weeks passed, Leo channeled his energy into reshaping his company's culture and priorities. The changes weren't always popular with shareholders, but Leo found he cared less about stock prices than he once had. His experience on the streets, and more importantly, his time with Lena, had shown him what really mattered. He drove by the bookstore occasionally, always careful to remain unnoticed. Through the windows, he could see it taking shape, shelves being installed, the warm glow of lamps, a small reading area with comfortable chairs. One day he spotted a sign being hung in the window, "Whitmore Books and Community Space." Leo smiled despite the ache in his chest. She was bringing her dream to life. On the store's opening day, Leo couldn't resist getting a closer look. Disguised in a business suit, sunglasses, and a neatly trimmed beard, quite different from his homeless appearance, he joined the small crowd gathering for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Lena stood by the door, radiant in a simple dress, her hair styled and her face glowing with pride and purpose. She spoke briefly about her vision for the space, not just a bookstore, but a community hub where people could connect, learn, and find support. "Books saved me during the darkest time in my life," she told the assembled crowd. "I want this place to be a sanctuary for anyone who needs one, regardless of their circumstances." Her words touched Leo deeply. Even after everything she'd been through, her compassion remained intact. As the crowd applauded, their eyes met briefly across the gathering. For a terrifying moment, Leo thought she recognized him, but she simply smiled politely and moved on to welcome another guest. That night, Leo sat in his penthouse, a glass of expensive scotch untouched beside him as he looked out over the city lights. He had done what he could for Lena. She had a home, a business, a fresh start. The legal case against Marcus Green was proceeding, with every indication that Lena would reclaim her grandmother's original bookstore as well. By any objective measure, Leo's anonymous intervention in her life had been a success. He should feel satisfied, maybe even proud. Instead, he felt hollow, because the one thing he wanted most, to share in her joy, to be part of her life, was the one thing his deception had made impossible. A week later, Leo received an unexpected call from Jenkins. "Sir, there's something you should know," his security advisor said, sounding uncharacteristically hesitant. "Ms. Whitmore has been asking questions about the trust, the property, the funding." Leo frowned. "I thought the structure was airtight. She shouldn't be able to trace anything back to me." "It was, sir, but she's remarkably persistent. She's hired a private investigator who's been digging into the shell companies. They haven't reached you yet, but given enough time, she'll find out it was me," Leo finished, feeling a complex mix of dread and something like hope. "Thank you for the warning, Jenkins." After ending the call, Leo paced his living room, weighing his options. He could add more layers to the deception, make it even harder for Lena to uncover the truth. Or he could do something he should have done weeks ago, face her directly and accept whatever consequences came with the truth. The decision, when it came, felt like the first truly free choice he'd made in years. The next morning, Leo dressed simply in jeans and a sweater. Not the rags of his homeless disguise, but not his usual designer suits either. Just a man without pretense. He took a small envelope and made the drive downtown, his heart pounding harder with each mile. Whitmore Books was quiet when he arrived, just a few customers browsing the shelves. Lena stood behind the counter, arranging a display of new releases. She looked up as the bell above the door chimed, her customer service smile freezing when she recognized him. "Leo," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Lena," he replied, approaching the counter slowly. "You've done amazing things with this place." She glanced around, pride momentarily overcoming her wariness. "It's coming together. Did you need something?" The distance in her tone hurt, but Leo understood it. He deserved nothing more. "I wanted to give you this," he said, placing the envelope on the counter, "and to apologize, properly this time." Lena looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "What is it?" "The truth," Leo said simply. "About the building, the trust, the bookstore, all of it." Her expression hardened. "It was you, wasn't it? This whole time." Leo nodded. "I wanted to help you, but I knew you wouldn't accept anything directly from me. Not after everything. So you decided to keep lying to me," Lena said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "To manipulate my life from behind the scenes. I wanted you to have a chance to rebuild on your own terms," Leo tried to explain. "To have security, to follow your dream without feeling indebted to anyone." "Without feeling indebted to you, you mean," Lena corrected him. A customer approached the counter, and she quickly composed herself, handling their purchase with professional courtesy before turning back to Leo. "Do you have any idea how this feels, to discover that nothing in my life is what I thought it was?" Leo winced at the pain in her voice. "The bookstore is yours, Lena. Truly yours. All the paperwork is in that envelope. The deed to this space, the title to your apartment, everything transferred completely into your name. No strings, no hidden clauses." Lena finally took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "Why now? Why tell me at all?" "Because you deserve the truth," Leo said, "and because I couldn't bear knowing that the last thing between us was a lie." Lena stared at the envelope in her hands, conflicting emotions crossing her face. Before she could respond, the store phone rang. She answered it automatically, her eyes still on Leo. "Whitmore Books? Yes. Tonight?" She checked the small calendar beside the register. "A private event? I don't usually, I see." Her expression changed, interest overtaking her wariness. A charity fundraiser for literacy programs? Yes, I'd certainly be interested in discussing that. Leo watched as she jotted down details, wondering at the timing of the call. When she hung up, her demeanor had shifted slightly, a new energy animating her movements. I need to close up soon, she told Leo, her voice carefully professional. Someone wants to host a charity event here tonight. Apparently, they specifically requested this venue. Leo frowned, a sense of unease growing within him. He hadn't arranged any event. That's quite sudden. It is, Lena agreed, studying him with renewed suspicion. Another one of your secret plans? No, Leo said honestly. This has nothing to do with me. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because her expression softened slightly. I believe you, but I still need you to leave now. I have a lot to prepare if I'm hosting an event tonight. Leo nodded, understanding that she needed space. Will you read what's in the envelope? I don't know, Lena answered, her honesty cutting deeper than anger could have. Goodbye, Leo. The finality in her voice left him no choice but to go. As he reached the door, he turned back. Lena, whatever you decide about the bookstore, about me, I just want you to know that nothing was fake. Not my feelings, not our connection. That was all real. Her expression remained guarded, but she gave a small nod of acknowledgement before turning away. Outside, Leo sat in his car for several minutes, torn between driving away and staying to make sure this mysterious event wasn't some kind of trouble. His instincts as a businessman had saved him from countless traps and scams over the years, and something about this sudden charity function felt wrong. He called Jenkins. I need information on a charity event happening tonight at Whitmore Books, he explained. It came up very suddenly, and I want to make sure it's legitimate. On it, sir, Jenkins replied. I'll call you back shortly. Leo drove around the block, parking where he could see the bookstore entrance without being obvious. He watched as Lena flipped the sign to closed and began rearranging furniture, creating space for what appeared to be a small gathering. Jenkins called back 20 minutes later. Sir, there's no registered charity event in that location tonight. Nothing's been filed with the city for permits, no public announcements. But I did find something interesting. Marcus Green made several calls to a catering company and an event planning service earlier today. Leo's unease crystallized into certainty. It's a setup. Appears that way, sir. Would you like me to intervene? Leo considered this for a moment. Number? I'll handle it, but have a legal team standing by, just in case. As evening approached, Leo watched as delivery people brought in small tables, floral arrangements, and catering equipment. Lena greeted each with growing confidence, clearly warming to the idea of hosting her first event in the space. She looked happy, purposeful, exactly as Leo had hoped she would be when he created this opportunity for her. He couldn't let Marcus Green ruin that. Just before 7, a sleek black car pulled up, and Marcus himself stepped out, accompanied by several well-dressed individuals who carried themselves with the particular arrogance of wealth. Leo recognized the type immediately. Opportunistic investors looking for easy prey. It was time to act. Leo made a quick call to his office, giving specific instructions, then headed toward the bookstore. He entered just as Marcus was making introductions. And this is Jonathan Wells from Heritage Development, Marcus was saying to Lena, gesturing to a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. He's very interested in what we're doing here. Lena smiled politely, though Leo could see confusion in her eyes. It's lovely to meet you all. Thank you for choosing Whitmore Books for your charity event. Oh, it had to be here, Marcus replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This building has such potential. Leo stepped forward, making his presence known. Good evening. The room froze. Marcus's face contorted with shock and then calculation as he recognized Leo. Lena's expression was equally surprised, though tinged with something else. Relief, perhaps. Mr. Sinclair, Marcus recovered quickly, extending a hand. What an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware you were invited to our little gathering. Leo ignored the outstretched hand. There is no charity event, is there, Marcus? This is a showcasing of the property for potential developers. The investors shifted uncomfortably, sensing conflict. Lena stepped forward, her face flushing with anger as understanding dawned. Is that true? She demanded of Marcus. You lied about the charity? Business, my dear, Marcus replied dismissively. Just business. This building is prime real estate, and these gentlemen are very interested in acquiring it for redevelopment. The building isn't for sale, Lena stated firmly. Marcus smiled condescendingly. Actually, it is. Once your legal troubles are settled, that is. What legal troubles? Leo asked sharply. Marcus turned to the investors. Gentlemen, would you give us a moment? Perhaps enjoy some of the refreshments in the meantime. As the group moved away, Marcus's pleasant facade dropped. Did you think I wouldn't find out who was backing her? He asked Leo quietly. The mysterious trust, the sudden funding. Very clever, but not clever enough. Whatever game you're playing, it's over, Leo said firmly. The property belongs to Ms. Whitmore now, legally, irrevocably. Marcus smirked. Does it? My legal team has discovered some very interesting irregularities in how the trust was established. Offshore accounts, shell companies, all traceable back to you, Mr. Sinclair. The courts might have something to say about that kind of manipulation. Leo felt a cold anger building within him. You're bluffing. Am I? Marcus pulled out his phone, showing an email from a law firm. This filing goes to the court tomorrow morning, alleging conspiracy and fraud. By the time it's sorted out, Ms. Whitmore's reputation will be in tatters, again. And I'll be happy to take this property off her hands for a very reasonable price. Stop it, both of you, Lena interjected, her voice tight with controlled fury. I won't have my bookstore used as a battleground for your power plays. She turned to the assembled guests, raising her voice. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This is not a charity event, nor is this property for sale. The event is canceled. The investors looked to Marcus, who attempted to salvage the situation. Lena is understandably emotional. Perhaps we could— The lady asked you to leave, Leo interrupted firmly. For a moment, it seemed Marcus might argue. Then, with a tight smile, he nodded to his associates. Another time, perhaps. Gentlemen, shall we? As the group filed out, Marcus paused beside Lena. This isn't over, he said quietly. You're in over your head, playing with people far more powerful than you could ever be. Once they were gone, Lena sank into a chair, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation seemingly evaporating. He never stops, she whispered. He takes and will never be satisfied. Leo approached cautiously, unsure of his welcome. I'm sorry, Lena. I never meant to bring more trouble to your door. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but clear. You didn't. Marcus did. She gestured to the chair opposite her. Sit, please. Leo sat, watching as she opened the envelope he had given her earlier. She scanned the documents inside, her expression unreadable. You really did transfer everything to me, she said finally. No conditions, no hidden claims. Yes. She set the papers down carefully. Why? Why go to all this trouble for someone you barely know? Leo considered his answer carefully. When you shared your meal with me that first night, it changed something in me. I saw a kindness I'd forgotten existed in the world. And then, as I got to know you, I realized that kindness wasn't weakness. It was strength. The strength to keep caring, keep hoping, even when life has given you every reason not to. He paused, gathering his thoughts. My whole life, I've accumulated wealth, power, things, but I'd forgotten what it meant to simply be human. You reminded me. Lena studied him for a long moment. That night in the rain, was that planned? Did you deliberately put yourself in my path? No, Leo answered honestly. That was chance. Or fate, maybe. I had been living on the streets for weeks by then, trying to understand what had gone wrong in my life. Meeting you was unexpected. She nodded slowly, seeming to accept this. And now? What happens now with Marcus's threats? If you'll allow me, I can help, Leo said. Not by throwing money at the problem, but by standing with you. My legal team can counter his claims, prove that everything was done properly with the property transfer. And what would you want in return? Lena asked, wariness returning to her voice. Nothing, Leo replied simply. Absolutely nothing. If after this you never want to see me again, I'll respect that. But I won't let him hurt you because of my actions. Before Lena could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it, her eyes widening. It's from the community center. They're hosting a gala fundraiser tonight, and the keynote speaker just canceled. They're asking if I can fill in and talk about the new bookstore. She looked up, suspicion in her eyes again. Did you arrange this too? Leo shook his head. No, but it's perfect timing. This is your chance to tell your story, on your terms, to show everyone what you've created here. Lena bit her lip, considering. I'm not prepared. I don't have anything to wear, any speech planned. You don't need a fancy dress or prepared remarks, Leo assured her. Just tell them your vision for this place, like you told me that day under the bridge. Your passion is more compelling than any rehearsed speech could be. Determination replaced doubt in Lena's expression. You're right, I should go. She paused, then asked reluctantly, Would you come with me? Not as any kind of date, she clarified quickly, but as backup, in case Marcus tries something else. Of course, Leo agreed, careful to hide the surge of hope her request had sparked. I'll follow in my car. The community center had been transformed for the gala, twinkling lights and flowers disguising its usual utilitarian appearance. Attendees in formal wear mingled over champagne and canapes, representing a cross-section of the city's wealthy philanthropists and community leaders. Lena entered with her head high, wearing the simple dress she'd had on all day. If she felt out of place among the designer gowns, she didn't show it. Leo followed at a respectful distance, nodding to a few business associates who recognized him, but keeping his focus on Lena. The center's director spotted them and hurried over, relief evident on her face. Lena, thank you so much for coming. And Mr. Sinclair, what an unexpected pleasure. I didn't realize you two were acquainted. We have a complex history, Lena replied diplomatically. Well, we're thrilled to have you both. Lena, you'll be speaking in about 20 minutes. Is that enough time to prepare? Lena nodded confidently. More than enough. As the director hurried away, Lena and Leo found themselves momentarily alone, despite the crowded room. Why do I get the feeling this wasn't a coincidence? Lena asked, glancing at him sideways. Leo shrugged. The universe works in mysterious ways. She almost smiled at that, and Leo felt a flicker of the connection they had once shared. But before he could say anything more, the director returned to escort Lena to the stage. Leo watched as she stood before the crowd, initially nervous but growing more confident with each word. She spoke about her journey from homelessness to business owner, about her vision for the bookstore as more than a commercial enterprise, as a sanctuary, a community hub, a place where stories could change lives as they had changed hers. She didn't mention Leo's role in her story, and he was glad of it. This was her moment, her triumph. The audience responded with growing enthusiasm, captivated by her sincerity and passion. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People swarmed around her, offering congratulations, support, contacts. Leo hung back, content to witness her success from afar. He was about to slip away when one of the event organizers approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise addition to our program tonight. Mr. Leo Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Technologies, has asked to say a few words. Leo froze, completely caught off guard. He hadn't arranged this. As the spotlight found him and the crowd applauded expectantly, he had no choice but to approach the stage. Lena watched him with undisguised surprise, perhaps wondering what new deception this might be. Leo took the microphone, his mind racing. This wasn't his plan, but perhaps it was an opportunity. To be completely honest, not just with Lena, but with himself. Thank you, he began, his voice steady despite his internal turmoil. I hadn't planned to speak tonight, but after hearing Ms. Whitmore's powerful story, I felt compelled to share something with you all. He paused, finding Lena's eyes in the crowd. Many of you know me as a successful businessman. What you don't know is that 2 months ago, I walked away from that life. I disguised myself as homeless, living on the streets, trying to understand what had gone wrong in my world of privilege and power. A murmur ran through the crowd. Leo continued, his gaze never leaving Lena. And then, on the coldest, rainiest night, a young woman with nothing to her name shared her last meal with me. She didn't know who I was. She just saw someone in need and responded with kindness. The room had gone completely silent. That woman was Lena Whitmore, and in that moment, she taught me something I had forgotten in my years of accumulating wealth and power. That true worth isn't measured in dollars or assets, but in compassion, in human connection. Leo saw tears gathering in Lena's eyes, but he couldn't tell if they were from anger or emotion. I stand before you today a changed man because of her example. And I pledge to you all that moving forward, Sinclair Technologies will be guided by that same spirit of compassion and community that Ms. Whitmore embodies. Thank you." As he stepped away from the microphone, the audience erupted in applause. But Leo didn't hear it. His focus was entirely on Lena, who stood motionless in the crowd, her expression a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't decipher. The director retook the stage, clearly delighted by the unexpected drama. What an extraordinary revelation. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we're witnessing a remarkable story unfold before our eyes. A homeless woman and a billionaire brought together by an act of kindness. The crowd's reaction intensified, phones appearing to capture the moment, whispers spreading rapidly. Leo could see Lena's growing discomfort at being the center of such attention. He made his way to her through the crowd. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't plan for this to happen." "I believe you," she replied, her voice barely audible above the noise. "But I need to go. This is too much." Leo nodded, understanding completely. "Let me help you get out of here." With a protective arm that didn't quite touch her, he created a path through the crowd, deflecting questions and congratulations with practiced ease. They made it to a side exit, emerging into the quiet night air. Lena took a deep breath, her composure returning now that they were away from the spotlight. "You didn't have to say all that," she said finally. "About me, about that night." "Yes, I did," Leo replied. "It was the truth, and it was time everyone heard it, including me." She studied him in the dim light, as if seeing him clearly for the first time, not as the homeless man she'd befriended, not as the billionaire who'd deceived her, but as someone entirely new. Someone caught between those identities, struggling to find his way just as she had been. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "This is all so overwhelming." Leo nodded, understanding her hesitation. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. The bookstore is yours, regardless of what you think of me, and I'll have my legal team handle Marcus first thing tomorrow." Lena's gaze remained steady on his face. "And what about us? What happens there?" The question hung between them, weighted with all that had passed, the deception, the hurt, but also the undeniable connection they had formed, first under a bridge in the rain, and then through all that had followed. "That's entirely up to you," Leo answered softly. "I care about you, Lena, more than I thought possible, but I've done enough deciding for both of us. Whatever comes next has to be your choice." Lena nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a possibility, and for tonight, that was enough. In the days that followed, Lena threw herself into work at the bookstore, keeping her mind occupied with inventory, event planning, and building relationships with customers. The store was gaining popularity, especially after the events at the gala had spread through social media. People came in curious about the homeless girl and the billionaire story, but many returned for the warm atmosphere and carefully curated book collection. Leo kept his distance, true to his word about letting her decide their next steps. His legal team moved swiftly against Marcus Green, filing countersuits that effectively neutralized his threats against the bookstore property. Within a week, Marcus had withdrawn his claims, though Lena remained wary of what other schemes he might devise. The case regarding her grandmother's original bookstore was progressing well too. With the evidence Leo had provided, the authorities were building a fraud case against Marcus. Lena tried not to think about Leo's role in all this, how different her life would be if he hadn't entered it, first as a seemingly homeless man, and then as her unexpected benefactor. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Lena was organizing a new shipment of children's books when the store's bell chimed. She looked up to see a well-dressed older woman entering, her keen eyes taking in every detail of the space. "Welcome to Whitmore Books," Lena greeted her warmly. "Can I help you find something?" The woman approached the counter, studying Lena with undisguised interest. "So, you're the young lady who's captured Leo Sinclair's attention." Lena tensed slightly. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "Eleanor Sinclair," the woman replied. "Leo's mother." Lena's surprise must have shown on her face because Eleanor smiled slightly. "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced. I hope you don't mind." "No, of course not," Lena said automatically, though her mind was racing. "Would you like some tea? I keep a pot going for customers." "That would be lovely," Eleanor agreed, following Lena to the small seating area at the back of the store. As Lena prepared the tea, she studied Leo's mother surreptitiously. The elegant woman carried herself with the same quiet confidence Leo possessed, though without his recent humility. Here was someone who had always known wealth and privilege, who had never questioned her place in the world. "Leo doesn't know I'm here," Eleanor said once they were settled with their tea. "He'd probably disapprove." "Why are you here, Mrs. Sinclair?" Lena asked directly. Eleanor appreciated the straightforwardness. "To meet you, of course, the woman who changed my son so dramatically." "I didn't change him," Lena countered. "Whatever changes he's made were his own choice." "Perhaps," Eleanor conceded. "But he's different since meeting you. The board members complain he's become idealistic, impractical. His focus has shifted from profit to people." She smiled slightly. "His father would be appalled. I, however, am intrigued." Lena wasn't sure how to respond to this assessment. "If you're worried that I'm after his money," Eleanor waved away the suggestion. "My dear, if you were after his money, you would have forgiven him immediately and been living in his penthouse by now." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "No. What fascinates me is that you've held him accountable. Do you know how rarely that happens to a man like my son?" Lena hadn't considered this perspective before. In her world, people were held accountable all the time, for mistakes, for bad luck, for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The idea that Leo had lived a life where actions rarely had consequences was foreign to her. "He hurt me," Lena said simply. "He lied about who he was." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "He did, and rather than buy your forgiveness, he's accepted your need for space. That's new for him." A customer entered the store, and Lena excused herself to help them find a book. When she returned, Eleanor was examining the community board Lena had set up near the register, covered with local announcements, job postings, and support resources. "This is what you envisioned, isn't it?" Eleanor asked. "Not just selling books, but creating a community." Lena nodded. "Books connect people, to ideas, to possibilities, and to each other. My grandmother understood that. Her store was a sanctuary for me growing up, and I want this place to be that for others." Eleanor studied her with new appreciation. "Leo told me about your grandmother and what happened after she passed. I'm sorry for your loss and for the injustice you experienced." "Thank you," Lena said, surprised by the genuine sympathy in the older woman's voice. "You know," Eleanor continued, "when Leo was a child, before the technology empire and the billions, we lived above a small hardware store his father owned. Leo would help customers find exactly what they needed, remember their names, their projects. He cared about people then." Her expression grew distant. "Somewhere along the way, as the business grew, he lost that connection." Lena tried to imagine a young Leo, eager to help, untouched by the isolation wealth would later create. "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "Because he found that part of himself again with you. When he thought he had nothing, when you saw him as just another human being in need." She set down her teacup decisively. "I'm not here to plead his case or pressure you. I simply wanted to meet the woman who reminded my son of who he used to be." After Eleanor left, Lena found herself thinking about their conversation throughout the day. She had been so focused on Leo's deception that she hadn't fully considered what their meeting had meant for him, how seeing himself through her eyes had changed his perspective. That evening, after closing the store, Lena walked to a small park nearby. She needed to think, to clear her head. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath her feet as she followed the winding path. She had created a good life for herself these past weeks. The bookstore was thriving, her apartment above it was comfortable, and she was no longer worried about her next meal or where she would sleep. She had achieved the security she'd been fighting for since her grandmother's death. And yet, something was missing. The joy she felt in her accomplishments was dampened by a persistent emptiness she couldn't quite name. As twilight descended, Lena found herself on a familiar street. Without conscious intention, her feet had carried her to the spot where she had first met Leo, or the man she had thought was Leo, on that rainy night that seemed a lifetime ago. The memory of sharing her meager meal with him, of his genuine surprise at her kindness, remained vivid. "I thought I might find you here." The voice startled her. Leo stood a few feet away, respectfully maintaining his distance. He was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, his hair slightly tousled by the breeze. Your mother came to see me today, Lena said, watching his expression shift to surprise. I'm sorry about that, Leo replied, looking genuinely chagrined. She can be direct. I liked her, Lena admitted. She reminded me that there are multiple sides to every story, including ours. Hope flickered in Leo's eyes, quickly tempered with caution. Lena, I need to say something, she interrupted gently. I've been thinking a lot about us, about what happened. She took a deep breath. When I found out who you really were, I felt betrayed. But I've realized something important. The man I met that night, the man who sat with me in the rain and listened to my dreams, that man was real. Your circumstances were a lie, but you weren't. Leo remained silent, letting her continue. I was so angry that you'd hidden your wealth, that you'd watched me struggle without saying anything. But I understand now that you were struggling too, just with different things. Emptiness, disconnection, purpose. Yes, Leo said softly. I was drowning in a different way. Lena nodded. We saved each other, I think. You gave me a chance to rebuild my life, and you showed me what real living looks like, Leo finished. What matters beyond balance sheets and business deals. They stood in silence for a moment, the understanding between them deepening. I'm not ready to jump into anything, Lena said carefully. There's still a lot I need to process, but I think I'd like to get to know the real Leo Sinclair, slowly, on equal footing this time. The smile that broke across Leo's face was genuine, lighting his eyes with a joy that reminded Lena of their early conversations. I'd like that very much. Maybe we could start with coffee, Lena suggested. Tomorrow morning? Coffee sounds perfect, Leo agreed, careful not to push for more. Where? Lena considered for a moment. At my bookstore, 9 o'clock. I make a pretty good brew. I'll be there, Leo promised. As they parted ways, Lena felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. An acknowledgement that people could make mistakes, even terrible ones, and still deserve a second chance. That relationships could be rebuilt, perhaps stronger for having been broken and mended. The next morning, Leo arrived precisely at 9, carrying a small potted plant rather than the extravagant bouquet his wealth might have suggested. The gesture touched Lena. He was making an effort to meet her on her terms, to demonstrate that he understood her values. For your reading nook, he explained, setting the plant on the counter. Nothing fancy, but it adds some life to a space. Thank you, Lena said, genuinely pleased. Coffee's ready in the back. They settled at the small table in the staff area, the bookstore not yet open for the day. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow over the shelves of books surrounding them. So, Lena began, tell me about the real Leo Sinclair. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just the man. Leo considered the question thoughtfully. The real Leo likes old science fiction novels and jazz music, can't cook to save his life, wanted to be an astronaut as a kid, misses his father, who died before the company really took off, wishes he had paid more attention when his mother tried to teach him to dance. Lena smiled, enjoying these glimpses of the person behind the wealth and power. Why did you really walk away from your life that day? The honest answer. Leo's expression grew serious. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself anymore. I had just signed a deal that would make the company millions, but put hundreds of people out of work. Everyone around me was celebrating, but I felt hollow. He stared into his coffee. I needed to remember what was real, what mattered. I thought a week on the streets would give me perspective. And did it? Not the way I expected, Leo admitted. I thought I'd see suffering and feel grateful for what I had. Instead, I saw humanity, good and bad, and realized how isolated I'd become in my tower of privilege. And then, I met you. He looked up, meeting her eyes. And everything changed. Their conversation flowed easily, spanning hours as the bookstore opened and customers came and went. Lena took breaks to help people find books, often pulling Leo into the discussions about favorite authors and recommendations. He proved to have a genuine knowledge of literature that surprised and pleased her. As closing time approached, Lena found herself reluctant for the day to end. Their coffee had turned to lunch, then afternoon tea, the hours passing in comfortable conversation. I should let you close up, Leo said finally, sensing her internal conflict. Would you? Lena hesitated, then continued with newfound confidence. Would you like to help me? and maybe we could get dinner afterward? Leo's smile was answer enough. The next weeks fell into a pattern: coffee at the bookstore, conversations that ranged from mundane to profound, careful steps toward rebuilding trust. Leo never pushed, never assumed, always letting Lena set the pace of their relationship. And gradually, the walls between them began to crumble. 1 month after their new beginning, Lena received the news she had been waiting for. The court had ruled in her favor regarding her grandmother's bookstore, finding that Marcus Green had indeed committed fraud. The property would be returned to her, along with damages for lost income. Leo was at the bookstore when the call came. He watched as Lena's expression transformed with joy and vindication, her hands trembling as she hung up the phone. "I won," she said simply, tears gathering in her eyes. "The store is mine again, my grandmother's store." Leo embraced her then, the first time he had done so since their kiss by the river so long ago. "I'm so happy for you, Lena. So very happy." As they celebrated that evening, with a small dinner at Lena's apartment above the shop, a question hung unspoken between them. "What will you do now?" Leo finally asked. "With 2 bookstores?" Lena had been considering this very question. "I want to keep this one," she said, looking around at the space they had come to share in many ways. "It represents my fresh start, what I built from nothing. But my grandmother's store, that's where I grew up, where my love of books began." "You could run both," Leo suggested, "or perhaps use one for a different purpose." A spark lit in Lena's eyes. What if the original store became a community literacy center? Free books for children, reading programs, support for adults learning to read. Her excitement grew as she spoke. And this store could remain the commercial side, supporting the nonprofit work. Leo smiled, recognizing the passion that had first drawn him to her. "That sounds perfect." "It would take resources, though," Lena acknowledged, her practical side asserting itself. "The damages from the lawsuit won't cover everything I'm imagining." "I could help," Leo offered cautiously. "Not as a handout, but as a partner, if you'd want that." Lena studied him for a long moment. "A business partner?" "Or more," Leo said softly. "If that's where this is heading." The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Lena thought about how far they had both come, from a shared meal in the rain to this moment of potential partnership in all senses of the word. "I think," she said finally, "that I'd like to figure that out together, day by day." 6 months later, the Whitmore Literacy Center opened in the renovated space of Lena's grandmother's original bookstore. Children from the surrounding neighborhoods filled the bright rooms, discovering worlds within pages, just as Lena had done as a child. The community embraced the center, volunteering time and resources to ensure its success. Leo stood beside Lena at the grand opening, watching with pride as she cut the ribbon. They had found their rhythm in the months since their reconciliation, equals despite the material disparity between them, each bringing different strengths to their relationship. "I have something for you," Leo said that evening as they walked along the riverbank where they had once kissed. He handed her a small box, distinctly not ring-sized. Lena opened it curiously, finding a simple key inside. "What's this?" "The key to a cabin," Leo explained. "Your grandmother's cabin in the mountains. I found it, restored it. It's yours again." Tears filled Lena's eyes. The last piece of her legacy. "There's a letter, too," Leo said, producing an envelope. "I found it hidden in a wall during the renovation. It's addressed to you, in your grandmother's handwriting." Lena took the letter with trembling hands, too overcome to open it immediately. Instead, she looked up at Leo, seeing in his eyes the same man who had sat beside her that rainy night, stripped of pretense, genuine in his care for her. "You once asked why I shared my food with you," she said softly. "Do you remember what I said?" Leo nodded. "You said kindness was all you had left to give." "I was wrong," Lena realized. "Kindness wasn't all I had. It was everything I needed. It brought you into my life. It helped me rebuild when I thought all was lost. And it showed me that true wealth isn't in money, it's in compassion and love." Leo took her hand, his touch gentle yet sure. "I used to have everything and feel nothing. Now I understand what matters." As they stood together by the river, the city lights reflecting on the water, Lena thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. From a homeless girl and a disguised millionaire sharing a meager meal, to partners in both business and life, Their story had unfolded in ways neither could have imagined. "Ready to go home?" Leo asked. Lena smiled, the word home resonating deeply. Not the penthouse Leo still maintained, nor the apartment above her bookstore, but the sense of belonging they had created together. A home built not of walls and wealth, but of understanding, forgiveness, and love. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." They walked hand in hand into the evening, their path illuminated not by the certainty of wealth or the desperation of poverty, but by the balanced light of mutual respect and genuine connection, the truest fortune either had ever known. What started with a simple act of kindness on a rainy night had transformed two lives forever, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come when we have nothing left to give but our humanity. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can change everything. The richest person isn't the one with the most money, but the one with the most love to give.